Hello everyone, welcome back to League of Legends DFS Esports for breakdown for June the 26th League of Legends slate. Uh, Pretty interesting one. There's going to be a few things I want to talk about here today, but quickly we can recap yesterday before we get into looking ahead. Overall, not the best day yesterday. Kind of whiffed on a few things. Uh, I went to the wrong area here, my bad. Um, there we go, first try. So we had RA versus Weibo. This one was I was on Weibo, and I thought Weibo would have been able to get the 2-0. But again, their inconsistencies are heralding them pretty hard. They definitely are losing a good bit, like of games here. I think they've won a lot of series. I could be mistaken, but I think they've had like like 2-1 wins so far. Um, if we check back Weibo, they beat RA 2-1, WE 2-1, IG 2-1. Their only 2-0 was against EDG, and they got 2-0'd. And they lost 2-1 to RNG. So they're dropping a lot of maps here. That's something I brought up yesterday. Is they dropped a map to IG, dropped one to WE, dropped one here to RA as well. So their inconsistencies are definitely showing. It's something I'm not huge on them for, and I definitely am looking to be against Weibo going forward. But on the flip side, I still did not see much from RA. Like, they did get the solid game one, but it definitely felt heavily abusive of the Shy. It seemed like Leon had a seventh jungle camp, and it was the top laner. Just full clearing and adding in killing the Shy along the way, and profit, and then he obviously used his gigantic lead to just take over the game. Pretty good map from Leon, but the next two were pretty unimpressive. And again, I still think iBoy is pretty bad. To put it bluntly, I still think iBoy is legitimately one of the worst players in the league. And I don't know. I still don't rate either of these teams very highly. For DFS purposes, I did end up kind of leaving this one out altogether, and it would have been a good move, you know. So that's pretty good start for the slate. Next one up was Top Esports FPX. FPX ended up winning the second game, but I think it was a pretty bad showing from Top Esports, more so than I think FPX looking that strong. Pretty crazy across the board, pretty uninspiring performance from both teams, obviously. I had a Top Esports to get this 2-0 pretty handily. Although they did dominantly win games 1 and 3, game 2 definitely looked really weird. Tion really looked bad. A lot of his decision making was really questionable in game 2, and I think he just does not fit this Trundle pick that they keep putting him on, and I'm not sure what they're loving, if it's just like a meta thing and they're just forcing him in there. But I really do not like the Tion on Trundle. He looked much better on something like the Wukong, where you can do actions, make plays, rather than just kind of being a more supportive type jungler. Pretty unimpressed with this one, I think, again, from both sides. Top Esports is, again, a team it's kind of like pulling both ways. I still think objectively they probably are like a top 5 team, but they're also kind of like the T1 of the LPL in a sense, where I just can't see them continuing to get away with how they're winning games. Yeah, and I still think FPX are pretty bad, although they've been looking a little bit better. I just wonder how much of this close series with Top Esports is going to inflate them, and that'll be something to keep an eye on for their next series as well. These teams are definitely in that middle tier that I kind of talk about often. There's the top tier of teams I want to target. There's the middle tier of teams that are kind of price based. I'm pretty indifferent on, and the bottom tier is kind of the teams I'm looking to target against. For example, I would probably have Weibo and RA in that bottom tier of teams I'm looking to go against. I would probably have both these teams, Top Esports and FPX, in that middle tier where it's just kind of price-based. We'll see it slate by slate, but pretty uninspired from both of them as well. Third series up was V5 RNG. I was on RNG pretty heavily. I thought they definitely would have been able to get the job done here, but they got beaten in the third game. The third game was actually a pretty big throw from them, I think. I think they were definitely in a very winnable spot here. If we look at the team comps and the time specifically, I don't think there's any way that V5 should be able to out team fight RNG here. Just the 80 carry matchup, I think, is enough to warrant this. Like a full 6-item of Helios going against a half tank Callista at 40 minutes. It should just never go in the Callista's favor, and that was pretty uninspiring. Like again, these teams are not ones I'm that high on either way. I'm still pretty low on RNG, considering their post MSI performances so far. They've definitely been pretty uninspiring, especially Xiaohu. I don't know what it is, but his stats have been pretty bad. His eye test does not look great either. They've just not looked good, and it's pretty uninspiring from the whole team altogether. The main reason I like them so much is because I thought V5 was getting a lot of respect here, and I didn't think it was warranted, but obviously it did end up being that way. V5 get the underdog win there. We were not on that one, so this just kind of a misread, a bad read here for me. Again, these teams I'm still not very high on either one. However, I do believe Rookie is going to be coming back soon, so I think that will take Victory 5 back up to the top, where they rightfully belong. Over in the LCK is where we had a lot more of the hot takes. We ended up going with the double underdogs in the LCK, so we want to talk about those as well. One of them went in our favor, one of them did not. Obviously, T1 ended up getting the 2-0 over Dom1 here. Game 1 was definitely very winnable. They just had like one really bad fight top lane, and it just so happened that their really bad fight top lane was when Baron was up, so T1 could snowball the game. T1, I think Dom1 were in a pretty really like a really good strong spot to win the match, or to win the first map at least, I mean, and they just kind of bottled it. I don't want to keep preaching this and then keep being wrong, but I really do not understand how T1 continue to get away with this. I feel like they play so poorly for like 95% of the match and then just pull something out of a hat and snowball it into a win. Like, it is a skill in itself, and to kind of have that fortitude in a way. I mean, I'm not huge hating on them. I've said it for a while that they are in that S tier teams. Like, I'm not disrespecting them. I just did not think that they deserved map 1. I much outplayed them in map 2. There's no arguing that T1's early game was actually much stronger in map 2. The Callista actually doing what it's supposed to do for once. I just don't know how T1 lost game 1, to be honest. That was a pretty drastic error, specifically from DuckDom. He completely trolled 2 fights, I believe. Definitely one of those dragon fights in that first game. He just completely disrespected the enemy team and walked all the way forward. He was in front when he should definitely be the furthest one back, and he did it again in game 2. He got just flash taunted by Faker's Galio multiple times. DuckDom completely trolled this series, and I think it definitely was the distinction there was DuckDom's really, really poor performance overall. I'm not going to change my opinion on these teams too much here, because I still believe Dom1 is the second best team and T1 is the third best team in the league. The results may say otherwise, but I didn't see enough, really, in my opinion, to change that. Then for the next series, LSB got the 2-0 over KT Rolster. We had the upset pick here, and again, that was one where we were pretty light on it. Obviously, I kind of like them, but as a longer range play in a way, like in a long shot play, it kind of sense, because I didn't see a ton of action happening here, and it didn't. We got the underdog pick. Again, I did recommend it was a better money line look than Jeff King's play, and that's exactly what it was. So overall in this one, not much to comment on, really. I think we kind of just got this one right. We talked about it yesterday, and I don't want to reiterate it too much because we do want to talk a little bit about tomorrow. So pretty interesting set of games tomorrow. I do have the numbers up. We can bring this up a little bit beforehand so we can have some context before. So if we look at the statistically speaking, the highest expected totals is coming from the Nongshim Hanwha series and then IGAL, and the other two are a couple kills behind them. overall, it feels very tough to believe that Nongshim Hanwha is going to be the most kill happy game. Then again, like, you can't ignore stats in a way. Like, I actually do think Nongshim are a pretty good spot here. Definitely, we saw it in their victory. Like, Ghost put up 100, Dread had 80, BDD had 80. I think their best player was Kana. He had 96. I mean, that's extremely strong for a top laner. So I definitely think Nongshim are definitely viable. Would I have them number one on the slate? Probably not. But it is what it is. I definitely would have IGAL as the biggest fantasy gold mine in the slate. Then probably Nongshim Hanwha. Then probably the other two are tied. I think, statistically speaking, the DRX KDF series is the slowest one. EDG, BLG kind of close behind them. There's a little bit more action, but slower game times here. So that's kind of the trade-off you make. And, it's why we tried to get these averages. Again, I would be pretty shocked if Nongshim Hanwha was the biggest scoring game on the slate, but statistically speaking, it is, and it's honestly not that close. Like, it's a little bit over a kill and a third, or a kill and a third more than IG versus AL. So, if that's the way you want to get unique, I would expect IG AL to be the two most popular teams on the slate. With good reason. I do, again, think that is a good spot, but, maybe if Nongshim's going to be lesser owned than both of those two teams, I don't see reason to try to avoid them per se. But now that we have an idea of what games we want to target, we'll talk about the teams from those games. So IG versus AL, this one is obviously pretty tough, especially for me. I like both of these teams. We know what my stance was when we look at AL and their really, really poor performance out last time. That's going to be an interesting one because there's a lot of ways you can interpret that. So we talked about, I legitimately believe that it was a little bit suspicious that AL played so poorly in their last series. And I talked about the reasons why. I don't want to rehash all that stuff. But we know AL is a wildly inconsistent team. They beat RA pretty good. They lost to LNG. They beat BLG. They lost to LGD. So they're on a pretty consistent win-loss here. So maybe it's time for them to pick up that win, keep the trend going. Obviously, that's joking. It's just they're wildly inconsistent, and I'm really not sure what to make of them because I was actually pretty high on them before. They actually were looking good before that LGD series, and they looked absolutely terrible, and I really am not sure what the difference was. Again, I was expecting AL to be like a decent favorite here, and they're not. And I'm just not sure what to make of either of these teams, especially AL. There's so many questions there, in my opinion. They were looking like I think those first three series, they were looking definitively like a decent team, decent for their expectations. They were looking like a playoff contender. Like, they would probably fight for this in like 9th or 10th playoff spot, lose in like the first round, and call it a day. I think that was a pretty decent expectation for them, and they were looking to be on that path. And they just got blown out by LGD in an honestly not close series when they were definitely going into it the better team. I just have very little idea what to go here. If we look over on the IG side, they actually had the game win against EDG. Close series. They got 2-0'd by Top Esports. They got a 2-0 over FPX and 1-2. They lost in 30 against Weibo in the first game of the split. So it's hard to put too much stock into that first game there. It's just really confusing and trying to guess where IG is. Like, they had a close series with EDG, who I think is a relatively middling team at the moment. For their standards, they're probably in that 5 to 8 range, or like 6 to 8 or something like that. That's probably the more area I think EDG is playing at. And I think IG had a close series with them. They got swept by Top Esports, who was probably top 5 as well. So they've lost to two good teams. They lost to Weibo, who's a relatively good team as well. Like, they lost to essentially 3 playoff teams I mean, keep in mind, 10 out of 17 teams make the playoffs, so literally more than half make the playoffs. But they lost to 3 playoff teams, and then they 2-0'd the non-playoff team here in FPX, who is the worst team in the league, I think, both statistically and I think, just kind of outright there. So it's just like, where are they? They're like, if you look at it, they've lost to 3 teams in the playoffs, and they beat them in 17th. So they're like, according to the standings, I think they're about where they should be. And I think AL's slightly above them, but at the same time, I think it's still extremely close. I think AL and IG are in the very same boat, and this is a complete pick'em. The betting line had AL as the slight favorite. We can say that, and it moved and we can tell because AL is the -1.5 spread pick. This one's tough, man. It really is. Both of these teams do the same thing so well. I wonder who's cheaper. Wow, AL is the most expensive team on the entire DraftKings slate. Wow. Okay, well, this actually makes my pick pretty easy. I was already leaning towards AL. Again, I mean, you guys already kind of know I am just an outright AL fan. And I know it's very odd to say that I'm an AL fan when I just accused them of match fixing like a couple of videos ago. But I still get excited for their games. I still like watching them play. And I do think they play in a pretty interesting and good fashion when they're not, I think, throwing games or what looks like throwing games. So I'm still pretty excited for them regardless. And like I just said, I do think if IG is like more in this like outside fringe playoff team, and I think AL's like an inside fringe playoff team, it's just tough. This one is a complete 50-50. Honestly, like, again, I think objectively you would probably be a little bit better off going with the IG side because they are so cheap. I think it's probably the number one game on the slate. And if you are looking at something like maybe cash or something like that, maybe for single entry, IG probably would, I think, be the better play. The reason I'm going against that is there's a couple of reasons. I think AL, maybe people are burnt and got burnt by them last time out and they don't want to go back to them. That's probably like a small percentage of people, but there is going to be some people who saw AL lose as a pretty big favorite last time out and they don't want to go back. Especially when they are so expensive. Like, Betty is literally the most expensive player on the entire slate, and he's in a coin flip game, and there's 3 other pretty sizable favorites here. So it's like, why would you want to go to Betty if you can get somebody else, like going to Viper on EDG for something, like for example, or something. Viper, Deft, Ghost, like there's good options underneath him. So there's a lot of reasons not to go to Betty. Even going to IG on the other side makes sense. I'm honestly just on the move of I just kind of want to pay to get Contrary in here. Like I said, this is probably the number one match you want to target. I think people are going to want to get the savings from IG. Like, they're so cheap. So I could imagine IG being the most owned team on the slate. Maybe people are burnt by AL. Like, I just feel like if you add up all those factors, they add up, little by little, and maybe AL come in a little bit under-owned where maybe they should be. And honestly, the rest of the underdogs are not looking fantastic. People, I can't imagine people would want to line up to play KDF or Hanwha. Maybe BLG, EDG, we'll talk about that in a second, but I just think AL might be the team squeezed out. And people might want to go with like an IG EDG or like an IG DRX, IG Nongshim. Like, a lot of the other builds make a lot more sense. But I like going to AL. I like the bounce back spot here. They're not a big betting favorite, so we probably don't have to worry about them looking to make a few mistakes, like maybe I think Forge's Corky incident, for example. But who knows? This one is extremely close. It's very hard to tell. Again, I like both these teams. I like both the play styles. They both have aggressive play styles, which again is why I have this as the biggest match in terms of DraftKings scoring. It's not a hot take at all. I don't think a lot of people probably agree with me there. But I just think this is a pretty decent bounce back spot for AL. I don't know. I just feel like it's hard. I'm hard pressed to ignore the kind of like first 3 series of them playing well and jump off the ship just because they played really bad once. Granted, it is AL. There's cause for concern. Who knows? Like, again, I think some of the things I talked about last time out still stand. Like their weird Zeri priority. I don't think Zeri is that strong for them to warrant like giving up everything for it. So there's definitely worry there. It's 50-50. I'm just slightly leaning towards AL. Hopefully they're the low owned team. I can't imagine they'd be ignored, but I think they, if AL is like a fairly priced team, like where they should be, if they're like in this slightly closer range, like you guys can see how their team slot price is like closest to each other. That makes sense because their odds are closest to each other. If we had that same sort of pricing for their players, we're probably having a different conversation right now. But I think this is a pretty good pay up to be contrarian spot. And hopefully a lot of people will go to that IG side, and it makes a lot of sense why. But, I'll go to the AL side. I don't love it, but, probably need to pick a side. And I'll just go back to the team that I think looked a little bit stronger in those first few games. But man, it's tough. Like I said, IG's, they've only lost to good teams. They've beaten the bad teams. So it's like, how good is IG really? This will be a pretty good test for them. I am very worried if AL play like they did last game. It's going to be another sweep and they're going to get swept again. But hopefully they bounce back a little bit here and they show that they show their superior team fighting. Again, I think AL is one of the top team fighting teams in all of the league. So hopefully they can muster something together here. And I think up next is a pretty interesting spot. BLG versus EDG. EDG minus 240. I think this is a pretty solid underdog BLG shot here. We talked about this last time out, I think, with BLG. I said we'll give BLG some time to get acclimated with the new roster. It's only been like 4 days, so it's not like a ton of time. But their first series back is against Top Esports. They're asking Icon to go up against Knight. I just want to double check and make sure. Icon actually played last time, right? I'm not crazy. BLG. Yeah, it was Bin Weiwei, Icon, Doggo, Crisp. Yep. So they've had Icon back in here for a little bit. Again, we're not looking at much of practice time. We're probably looking at less than a week. They played against the 619 match with Fofo. And then on the 22nd, they have Icon in. So probably like a day or two of practice here and then a couple more days here. So they still have yet to have much time together. Definitely cause for concern. However, again, we alluded to this last time out. I think this is a team on the uprising, and I think they're going to be a pretty solid team. I actually I still like Bin. I like Icon. I like Doggo and Crisp a lot. And the main difference here is last time out we saw EDG versus IG. I think IG were in a pretty strong winnable position, or like they were in a pretty close series here. They definitely could have won the series. The main difference was Viper popping off on the EDG side. Viper was by far and away like the best player in that series, and it really showed. And I think the difference in players' quality just showed too much. Although the series was close, I definitely would take that underdog shot every day of the week. They obviously won a game. They couldn't close it out in the second or third. But do I think Viper is going to be able to just turn it on and completely hard carry a game against the quality of BLG's players? Probably not. I think like pound for pound, BLG would have better players than IG everywhere. I think you could argue Jungle's pretty close. I think Weiwei and Shun is a pretty debatable matchup. But I think if IG made the series close with EDG, and I think BLG have better players in every spot, then why wouldn't this one be close also? Again, I just think EDG's been pretty shaky lately. They've yet to show anything convincing. I just think EDG are like perennially overvalued and overrated, especially from these betting markets, and mainly just from the betting markets. But that obviously lends itself into bleeding into DraftKings lineups and ownership and that kind of stuff. So for that reason, I just think EDG are like completely overrated. And again, this is similar to what we were talking about a couple of days ago. I think this is a buy low spot for BLG. I think they're a team that's going to be rising up. I think, again, Bin, Icon, Doggo, Chris, these are all pretty solid players. And I don't think Viper is going to be able to kind of pull one out of the hat and have a hard carry performance against the likes of Doggo and Crisp, who I think is actually one of the strongest bot lanes in the entire league. Obviously, the names on EDG completely worry me. I think all the players are extremely strong. They obviously won Worlds last year. They just have not been playing like that. And EDG is a team I have overvalued, and BLG is a team I have undervalued. So it seems like a pretty good spot to take that underdog shot. Makes a lot of sense to pair them up with AL. Again, that's kind of one of the reasons I talked about that, liking the pay up for AL option, and then going down to BLG. That makes a lot of sense here as well. So that's a pretty good starting spot, I think, for me, and something I'm going to look to prioritize a good bit here for sure. Yeah, I think we could touch on like Nongshim Hanwha for, just because it is statistically pretty strong options. One thing I want to look at is I'll look at Hanwha's losses and see how bad they've lost in their losses. Whoops, I'm in the LPL again. Korea. Match history. And we go to Hanwha's losses. So they lost here against DRX. Lost here against Gen G. That's a pretty tough schedule for them. And they lost to KDF here earlier. So they are 0-3. Let's look at their scoreboard and see how bad they're losing when they lose. DRX dropped 9 and 19. That's a wildly different scores. Genji 18, 16. So these are actually pretty decent numbers for them. KDF here 17 and 12. So mainly it was the series against DRX was actually pretty bad, but I think again DRX is a super slow team, so that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I'm fine with getting in some Nongshim. That definitely makes sense. When we look over to somebody like the DRX KDF series, this is definitely one I'm probably going to try to avoid, at least from a player standpoint. DRX is minus 310. KDF has not been inspiring. Both of these teams set up to be pretty slow, in my opinion. Obviously, the average game time is 37 minutes here. Similarly for Nongshim Hanwha, but I think this is a lot more of Nongshim not being able to close games, which is actually kind of a good thing for DraftKings purposes. That's why their numbers are actually pretty decent, is because Nongshim will win a team fight and then just fumble it right away so it's even again. It's like the ideal situation if what you want for DraftKings scoring. It's obviously insanely hard to replicate or depend on, which is why I'm not just loving Nongshim, smash spot here. But that's why I'm fine with going to Nongshim. They're a team that I think is going to like win a fight, lose a fight, win a fight, lose a fight. And I think that just adds up their scoring a good bit. So that keeps them in the conversation for sure. I don't think the same is true for DRX KDF. Both these teams I think play pretty slow. The average game time is over 37 minutes. The kills per minute is really low. I could see definitely DRX taking a pretty strong lead here. And that's a pretty good spot, I think, for them. We'll look at dragon rates, see if anything shows up here. Obviously, that's one of the biggest team slot scoring is dragons. Nongshim and DRX 61 and 50. Dragons for everyone else here. Not too crazy. IG, EDG. Pretty interesting there as well. So yeah, maybe Nongshim would be the team slot to go with. I'll take a look. Nongshim team slot, and they scored 60 in their 2-0. DRX has been 63-73. So yeah, DRX team slot would be the one you could get to if you can. Nongshim would be fine. AL, IG, you could maybe go with the AL team slot. They don't prioritize dragons that heavily, but I mean, they put up decent scores. Like 60, I think, is probably the baseline of a pretty good score. They've had 56 and 60, and they are a little bit cheaper. BLG team slot, I don't love it, but if you need the salary savings and you have BLG in your team, like getting that correlation there would make sense. If you need the savings and you have like some BLG players, obviously correlating with your stacks, it makes sense. But DRX, then Nongshim would probably be the ideal targets for me. So we'll look at the players. We look at anyone's legend and Nongshim already in my searches. It's something you like to see. Picking the same teams. Then obviously we'll go with BLG here as well, but we no icons numbers are probably not going to be in here. He just has a 2-game sample. So we can see right off the bat, it's pretty heavily strong for AL. They are typically the team that does more of the group up fighting, which is much stronger for DraftKings scoring, of course. Then BLG would be the second grouping because, you know, they're similarly speaking grouping up team fighting. Nongshim are on the lower end, but they're all above 60% other than Bin. I wouldn't put too much number in. I wouldn't look at icons numbers. 2-game samples, and especially in a 0-2, is extremely hard to look into. So mainly everybody is fine, really, except for Bin. Obviously, I would try to prioritize AL and BLG, but I don't want to just give you guys like a singular lineup build. I would be fine with getting in some Nongshim style as well. Nongshim BLG feels a little bad just because you're avoiding that whole series altogether, but there is certainly a possibility where IG and AL play surprisingly slow, and then if AL and IG both bomb, like if they both have a slow match or something, like if it goes 3 and their wins are not great, and they just kind of kill each other's value, being off that series will give you a lot of leverage, because I again think this is going to be a pretty heavily owned series for sure. So yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for me. Not too great of a slate. The AL pricing makes things a little weird. I think we'll quickly go position by position. That way we can just have an idea of it. But for top lane, it's ZDZ, then Kiana. ZDZ is pretty cheap, so I'd imagine in the AL stacks he will be pretty highly owned. For junglers, they're all fine. Weiwei's kill share is pretty high, so maybe that's a little bit of a tiebreaker you can make. But again, I would just try to get your junglers with whoever you're stacking with. For mid laners, they're all pretty fine. Again, icons numbers are not good, but I'm not scared by that at all, really. I think if BLG do well, he's probably going to do well. But obviously Forge and BDD's numbers are both fine as well. AD carries, they're all pretty strong, all pretty good options. They're all pretty heavily relied on to win the game, all over 30% kill share. Ghost's kill participation is a tad low, but it's definitely not concerning enough. Crisp and Chocho are definitely two very high support kill participation numbers. Effort is slightly below them, so maybe try to look to avoid getting off of effort and try to get onto somebody like Crisp and Chocho if you are going that way. So yeah, I think that'll be it from me today. A pretty exciting slate overall. I'm not sure. Quickly, I guess before we get out of here, we'll look at the slate tomorrow. A quick preview, because I know it's a 2-gamer. OMG, LGD, JDG, TT. You do not expect a video for this slate. There is no LCK tomorrow, so it's just going to be an LPL 2-gamer. I would imagine JDG is probably a huge favorite, and OMG is probably a pretty good size favorite as well. LPL Summer, all they don't have lines up for that. For me, quickly, this is just OMG and JDG all day, every day, and I'd imagine they're both going to be pretty decent sized favorites. So I'm probably going to be taking that day off. Don't expect a video from this. If you guys do want to get some degenerate lineups in, I definitely would have a 4-man JDG with a 2-man OMG. I can't imagine TT doing much against JDG, and although LGD looked good last time out, I think OMG is a pretty decent team. I think they're actually looking a good bit better. So the number I'd set this at, I think JDG is probably gonna be like minus 550, or maybe even something. Actually, TT's not that bad. Yeah, TT's not that bad. So I don't know. I would expect both of these games. I think they're both going to be like minus 250 or more. So maybe if for some reason the odds are close here, then you could look to get some OMG smash in or something like that. But don't expect much. I'm probably not going to end up making a video on this. Just a little LPL 2 gamer. I think these are pretty two-sized favorites here with OMG and JDG. So I will not see you guys tomorrow, most likely. I will see you guys the day after. And yeah, I'll see you guys then.